In a world where carbs are your enemy, you need one man to help you fight your battles. That man is Jimmy.
Combating nutrition disinformation and general bull. It's Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com.
All right, we are going live with Jimmy Rants. We're gonna pin this topic over here on Instagram and we'll get this show on the road. It is pouring down rain here today in Spartanburg, South Carolina. It is just absolutely, as we say in the South, raining cats and dogs. And so that means a whole lot of rain's coming down. So when a lot of rain down, what do? I always do that, you guys. I'm sorry about that. I'm trying to pin the comment. They don't make it easy on Instagram to pin. On Facebook, you can put the title in before you go live. But for some reason, Instagram makes you wait till you come online before they let you pin a post and put it out there. So, welcome in. We have another episode of Jimmy Rants in store for you today. Still talking about this issue of childhood trauma, and I've got a little bit of a controversial spin today that I want to talk about that I heard about on the Joe Rogan podcast. Love listening to his podcast. In fact, while I was on sabbatical, I listened to a lot of Rogan. I just love his style. I love how easygoing he is. I love that he just says what he wants to say. He doesn't really care what anybody thinks about what he has to say. So big fan. If you don't already follow the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, go check it out. But before I get started, I want to send out heartfelt prayers and thoughts for all the people in the Nashville, Tennessee area dealing with the after effects of that tornado that came through. I believe they said 8 people died in that. So if you live in and around that area, I hope you're doing okay today. We had a tornado hit here right at about a month-ish ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it was bad in some parts. Like Walmart had their whole front windows just smashed in, and it was really bad. So hope everybody is okay in Nashville. So I'm going to bring up a topic today that I think is really an interesting angle when it comes to talking about childhood trauma. Because you've heard me talk about how this made such a profound impact on me while I was gone on sabbatical, thinking about this issue because my stepfather had died, and all the feelings that came after that when there was revelations made that the narrative I had in my head about how things went down in my childhood that led me to living with my abusive father were totally wrong. And so I've been talking about that here the last few days on Jimmy Rants. Today I want to talk about whether this childhood trauma actually shaped me, and really anybody that's watching this that's gone through childhood trauma, into being successful. And you might think, well, wow, that's kind of a weird angle, Jimmy. And let me tell you what brought it on my radar screen. So I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, and he very specifically talked about a lot of the MMA fighters who he is really good friends with. He's in that industry, and how most of the successful fighters in MMA, the reason they are successful is they went through some stuff in their past. And so when you've been through stuff, something changes within you. Something inside of you drives you to be who you are. And when I was listening to Joe saying all that, I was like, I never thought about it that way. But if I'm being honest, I go back and reassess my own life and reassess why I am the way I am. I'm an extraordinarily driven person. I work very hard. I do things that I think other people don't do. And I just have this internal fire that just makes me go, 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 go. Now, I have always pointed to, well, I must have gotten a strong work ethic from my dad. And of course, I was always thinking like, I watched him work hard having restaurants and doing some other things successfully in business. So therefore, my watching him led me to want to do the same in my life. But I wonder if that was wrong. I wonder, he was still involved. I wonder if the abuse and the trauma that was inflicted on me was what drove me to have those qualities in my life. Think about it for a second. When you're dealing with pain, what is your body's number one inkling to do? To get out of pain as soon as possible, right? How do you do that when it comes to primarily emotional pain? Physical pain you can't really do much with except ice and bandages and stuff to cover the wounds. But the emotional pain, the things that cut you deep on an emotional level, how do you deal with those? You deal with them by putting up coping mechanisms. You deal with them by shifting thought patterns. You deal with them by wanting to prove everything that you heard wrong. And I heard some ugly stuff, you guys. I heard stuff from my dad that no dad should ever tell their son. You're worthless. You're never going to amount to anything. You don't deserve to be breathing. You name it, he pretty much said it to me. And I wonder how much hearing that, in the moment it was shocking, in the moment it hurt, but I wonder if over time that hurt turned to, I'm going to show him, and I'm going to prove him wrong. And that could have been a driving factor in why I am the way I am today. It's just something to think about. You don't really think about why you believe things, why you have certain qualities about you, until you kind of stop and unravel these things. Could it be that it was the childhood trauma itself that drove me to be a hard worker, drove me to want to help people, drove me to be the Jimmy Moore that you know today? And thus, from all those things, I became successful. I've been very successful in business. I've had 3 international best-selling books. I do the longest-running health podcast on the internet. I get to speak in all kinds of places around the world. For all intents and purposes, I have been extraordinarily successful in my life beyond what most people will be able to accomplish. Was it because of the childhood trauma? Would I have had all of these qualities but for the childhood trauma? I don't know. Now, let me be very clear about one thing. I don't think childhood trauma is the way to make yourself successful. Because there's probably some parents going, see, I should beat the crap out of my kid. They'll turn into something in their life. Well, here's the thing. It depends on that individual. How are they coping? What coping mechanism have they put in place to deal with their trauma? For me, it was possibly I'm going to prove them wrong, and I'm going to work hard to make sure I can prove them wrong. Other people may go the totally opposite direction. You might find yourself digging a hole, putting your head in the ground and going, oh my gosh, woe is me. And I know a lot of those kinds of people went through some stuff in their life, and today, in their 40s and 50s, they are still dealing with the ramifications of what happened to them. They were never successful. They did not take their experience in their childhood that was a very bad one, either emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. They didn't take it and make it a positive in their life later. They wallow in the pity. They enjoy playing victim still. And in the process, they're victimizing not just themselves, but everybody around them. And at the end of the day, they didn't take this event that made them grow up fast and turn it into something good. And it's a lesson for all of us that, okay, maybe bad things happen to you in your life, but that doesn't doom you for a life full of suffering and discontent. I think we choose our path. We choose our happiness. Our brains, even on a subconscious level, are making decisions for us, again, as a coping mechanism for dealing with the trauma. I remember when I left the house at 17 years old. I just graduated high school. 1 week later, I was sitting in a college classroom. And I was sitting in that classroom just trying to process what in the world just happened to me in the previous 3 years with all the abuse that happened to me, physically, emotionally, and sexually. And it took a long time. And I'm sure even while I was exceeding academically, I was an honor roll student in high school, all through the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I wasn't like at the top of my class. How could you be? How could you have all of that happening in your head, all of that turmoil in your head, and be as successful as you could be? And then, of course, I go to college and no financial help from family. I had to work my way through college. I got a few little grants here and there. I got the Pell Grant. They gave me $500, but that barely paid for the books. Everything else I had to pay for out of my pocket. And I'm always proud to look back and go, when I graduated college, I had no student loan debt. I paid it all off before I graduated. Now, then I went to grad school and I had a whole lot of debt that lasted for a little while until a few years back. But college was the first time in my life where I felt successful at something. And I graduated, guys, in 3 years. I went summer, fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, summer, fall, spring, and I graduated in 3 years because I was so motivated to convince my father, convince myself that I was better than all those things that he said to me. So did the childhood trauma lead to me being successful? Well, let me tell you, my 20s were rough. My 20s was when I was still processing the anger from the childhood trauma. My 20s was when I had head stuff that I just couldn't wrap my head around and figure out. My 20s were a very difficult time in my life. In fact, if I look back now, it was a blur. One big blur. And I remember every single job I had was some minion type of job, low income. I was in a corporate office of a Christian bookstore in my 20s, and I remember making $17,000 a year. $17,000 working in the corporate office for a chain of stores that had like 16 stores. How, pray tell, did I only make that much money? And I remember I was allowed to have my creativity. I purchased music and videos and different things for the company, and I was allowed to use my talents and skills to work that and to grow the business and blah, blah, blah. But at some point I wanted more, and I just hit this ceiling, and was never allowed. Then I moved here to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I get involved in a job in downtown Spartanburg. And once again, I had the opportunity to be gifted at what I did. And at some point I wanted more, and I applied to be in the marketing department for this company because I felt I had skills and talents. Even though I did not have education in marketing, it was clear my brain thought of ideas all the time. I was always sharing them with the marketing department, and they were like, oh, we love that. Oh, wow, that's awesome. Oh, wow. So I thought, okay, when a job opening comes up in that company, I am going to apply. And I applied, and yet again, the ceiling stopped me. It was after that job that I decided to go full-time with what I do now. So I started Living La Vida Low Carb 2005 as a blog, and in 2006 I decided to go full-time with this. So I've been at this a little while, you guys, and I have been working this ever since as my job. And it wasn't until I was able to work for myself and start doing things and showing the whole world, including my dad, that I was enough, that I was gifted, that I was talented, that I could be successful, that I became successful. Was it the childhood trauma that drove that? I'll let you decide that. Think about it in your own life. Maybe you've seen success. Maybe you've been able to make something of yourself despite your crappy past. A lot of us have. A lot of us have been motivated unlike any other thing. Now, I am not a fan of using negative experiences to motivate people. I don't think that in general is a good idea. And I certainly don't think we need to be beating kids, emotionally berating kids, giving kids a hard time at a very vulnerable time in their life, just for the sake of hoping they turn out well. Because I'm sure there's a lot of really great people that had an amazing experience when they were kids. And they turned out well and successful as well. So don't get me wrong with this question that I've pinned. Did my childhood trauma shape me into being successful? I'm not saying you can't be successful if you didn't go through trauma. Obviously you can. But I wonder what role this can play. So in that aspect, I'm trying to put a happy spin on this, guys. In that aspect, I'm thankful for the childhood trauma. Because if it made me who I am today, despite all the wasted years that I've talked about on a few previous Jimmy rants, all those years I wasted, 15 years after I left the house at 17, 15 years trying to process what that meant and what to do about it, and my brain dealing with it the best it could and developing coping mechanisms. That was a seminal part of my life that shaped me into who I am. And then I've spent the last 15 plus years trying to move on, trying to apply the lessons of what happened and coming to terms with that. And now more recently, coming to be at peace with it to the point that I forgive my perpetrator now, have empathy for him. And it has given me a lot of stock in my own life, trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with all of this? What do I do with this knowledge now that I am who I am as a result of what I went through and what I've been able to overcome? And I've come to the conclusion of, I think the reason I am who I am is exactly the childhood trauma. And that's okay. Because I think beautifulness and things that can be positive in your life can come from the ugliest parts of your life. And anytime you doubt that, just take a good look at yourself. Take stock. Understand that you are who you are today because of what you've been through in your life. And it doesn't even just have to be childhood trauma. It could be trauma of any kind. It could be the sudden death of a loved one. I will tell you, my dad, I told you about the abuse that he went through when he was a kid, which then led him to abuse me. But he had other traumatic events that happened later in life. His youngest sister, Yvonne, 21 years old, died in a car accident. So he was abused as a kid. He marries my mom at 17. He has my brother Kevin. My mom has my brother Kevin. He was involved in the process. And then I came along 4 years later when he was 21. When he turned about 25 or 6 is when he divorced my mom. And it was an ugly divorce, more trauma. And then a couple of years after that is when Yvonne died. More trauma. And then he was a police officer and he had a bullet come this close to hitting him in the head that would have killed him. More trauma. Trauma begets trauma begets trauma. And so he comes into this being a father to me in an extraordinarily traumatized state, to the point that he felt like he had to beat his kid and emotionally berate his kid. And those actions led me to develop coping mechanisms in my head that now make me into a man that's probably far different from the man I would have been but for that trauma happening. It's pretty mind-blowing when you stop and think about all of the things that happened in your life that could have changed you on a dime. Had I not been sent away to live with my dad, I would have still been tormented because my stepfather, who died in September, was just like my dad, emotionally berating. He never physically touched my mom, but she said he was just so horrible. I remember I would go visit during the holidays, and he would only allow my mom to come see me for 1 hour, and then she had to get back home. Who does that? But that was his personality, and he would have been my father figure in my teenage years had I stuck around. And he and I butt heads like from the very beginning. I did not like him at all. And he was just like my dad, very much a charmer, very much someone, he was a used car salesman, so that should tell you a little bit about who he was, but very much someone who was hurting from stuff in his past. And it's obvious now. In hindsight, I can see all of this stuff. The problem is, in the midst of it, I didn't see any of it. I didn't know any of this context. And that's something that's so sad. There's so many kids right now being emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused, and they have no idea that their perpetrator of their abuse was abused themselves. And it breaks my heart, because how much heartache and pain has to go on again and again and again, generationally, to the next generation, to the next generation, to the next generation. And we're not even talking about like how this impacts your relationships with people, how this impacts every area of your life. And you can turn it into something beautiful. You can turn it into something where you become successful in spite of the trauma. Or is it because of the trauma? Interesting, right? All right, I want to see what you guys have to say. And since this is an Instagram show, we're going to go to Instagram first. Stick around Facebook. I usually go after hours on Facebook so that you guys get a chance to have your questions addressed too. But what's up, guys? Welcome in. Thanks for being here on Jimmy Rants. All right, glad you're back, says Joyce. Well, Joyce, I'm glad to be back. It's been really fun getting back into the swing of things, doing my work, because I love every minute of what I get to do. Good to see you again, CKS. 19 people as of this morning lost their lives in that tornado. Oh yeah, the last report I saw was 8, so thank you for the update on that. Oh, what a wife says, kind of new to following you, looking forward to your new journey with you back here. Well, thank you for that. I'm glad to be back, and welcome to the fray. I'm glad you're here. Elise says, it pushed me to get out and do what I have to do to sustain myself. However, I'm a fighter on a personal level too. Personal relationships get hurt. Yeah. I think there's always a consequence to the childhood trauma making you so driven that you become successful. I wonder what the unexpected consequences, unintended consequences of that drive do to other parts of your life. So thank you for bringing that out. I'm listening while I drive to the doctor, says Bonnie. Well, I hope everything goes well with the doctor. Brittany says, childhood trauma 100% shaped me into being a person that wants to help others face and process their own negative thoughts and past trauma. Yeah, and you are doing that. And I wonder how many of us have gone through childhood trauma, Brittany, who just in general have a heart for other people. Because of the pain we experienced, we almost have this empathetic, sympathetic heart for people dealing with pain of any kind. It's an interesting thought process. We'll never know who we could have been if we were nurtured with love. That's the thing I keep coming back to. How would my life have been different if I had two loving parents that never divorced? They showed that love towards each other and towards me and my brothers and sisters. Would my life have changed and been different? Obviously, I think it would. Would it have been better than what it's turned out? I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that I'm glad I'm in this place I'm in now, because I think from the brokenness, I'm making stuff whole again. In the moment, it was really bad. In the moment, it probably set me on a course for obesity. In the moment, it was some of the hardest things I ever went through, to the point that I contemplated killing myself when I was in the midst of it. So believe me when I say I know this is real, and I know it had a profound impact on me. Had I not gone through it, would I be better off today than I am now going through that? I think sometimes you don't know how you're going to respond to adversity until you're thrown right in the midst of adversity. Would I have ever discovered I was stronger than any experience that ever happened to me? Would I have discovered that I could overcome my childhood trauma? I don't know. But what I do know is I'm liking the person I am now, because the person I am now is resilient and strong and an overcomer. And but for these bad things happening, I may have never known that about myself. I was at the top of my class in school because it was my out from the yelling and unprovoked hittings. I hid in my room doing homework. Yeah, I've been there, Brittany, where I excelled academically, and it's almost as if in the midst of it, it was the only thing keeping me grounded was being a nerd. It's the only thing that I felt normal in was academically. I knew I could excel. In fact, I've never shared this anywhere. I was so discouraged one semester of what was happening at home that I purposely got all D's, C's and D's. And I was a straight A and B student. I purposely missed answers on tests that I knew the right answer to. Purposely wanted to make worse grades. Why? Because I could. Because I wanted to. Because I was yet again lashing out at what was happening to me. Now, I only did that one semester, thank God, but it brought my GPA down just enough. But that was so weird to me that I did that. I purposely got bad grades one semester just to show, okay, that was fun. I can make C's and D's. And then I went back to making all A's and B's again. It's kind of weird what we do, right? Mommy's running on empty. Yes, I went as far as possible for college, worked 2 jobs in high school so that I was never home. Yeah, when you've got abuse, you try to stay away from your abuser as much as you physically possibly can. Lois says, I became very independent as an adult because my mom would beat me, treated me like her slave. I hated my childhood. I got married so I could get out of her house. And then I got married many times and depressed. It is amazing what we do to cover the pain. And it is amazing how quickly we get the heck out of the house when we can. The diet specialist, Elise, do you feel that sharing is helping you? I think our experiences drive us to help and protect others. Yeah, I would not have been bold enough to come on here had I not processed a lot of this when I was away on my sabbatical. Thank God I was gone 6 months. Like, gone. Like, no responsibilities whatsoever for 6 months in a row. I did not have to do anything except process. And I think that sped along the process of managing this mentally, coming to terms with it, what it means, and then using it to drive me to want to help other people that can learn from my experience. Now, I'm not pretending like I'm some expert in childhood trauma. I am not. just like when I came to low carb, all I'm doing is sharing my experiences. Now I'm learning a lot, and I'm coming to terms with what this means for me, but I'm not a licensed therapist. Please go seek professional licensed therapy if you feel like this is conjuring up things in you. Please go find someone to talk to and get parameters in place to deal with this. All I'm doing is bringing awareness to it and bringing my own experience of how I've dealt with it. But yes, to answer your question, I do think this has helped me, and it's going to continue to help me. I'm in a really good mental spot now. For 3 months after I left on sabbatical, dealing with some of the after effects of this, I was not in a good place, but I am now. So thank you for asking. The keto artist, I don't have any childhood trauma, but I have adult trauma. I feel it hindered me from reaching my potential. I'm still working through it to get where I know I can be. And again, I think some people have traumatic experiences that happen to them that drive them to be successful. And then there's other people whose personality types have trauma happen to them that they never fully deal with. I'm thinking of very specific people I know in my life that have had some horrific things happen throughout their childhood and into their adulthood that have just totally been horrible. And they've never come to terms with them. They've never admitted to themselves that what they went through was some stuff. And they've never really done the footwork to try to overcome that. And today they still feel the effects of that. And they're not successful. And their health is suffering. And they still deal with some of the ramifications in their weight. This is real stuff, guys. And I do think you hold the power within you to choose whether you want to wallow in pity over what happened, or if you're going to use those experiences that happened to you to motivate you to become what you're supposed to become. And I don't say this lightly, because I have been there on a lot of levels. And I still deal with some of those things in the head from time to time. But use them to motivate you, not discourage yourself. Lois says, it made me strong. Trauma made me push to be successful. And it does that for a lot of people, Lois. Brittany says, childhood trauma, adult trauma, medical trauma, which is what I'm facing now, emotional trauma. Trauma is anything that will leave you traumatized. Yeah. We don't need to just distinguish it. And I'm going to make this very clear. There is no one's trauma that's worse than another. If you've dealt with trauma, you've had trauma. Let's don't say to ourselves, and this is another coping mechanism, well, my trauma wasn't as bad as XYZ person, so therefore my trauma is invalid and their trauma is the only one that needs healing. No! Trauma is trauma is trauma, and if you dealt with it in your life, you need to deal with it now. Even if it was, quote, only emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is probably the worst kind of abuse there is. Physical you heal from, probably sexual abuse is up there too, but abuse is abuse. Trauma is trauma. Let's don't try to make a gradation scale of who's had more trauma than the other. Trauma is trauma is trauma. And if you've had it, you got to deal. I love the compassionate view you're expressing, says Steph Dodier. Thanks, Steph. Trend says it looks like you've lost a lot of weight. Actually, it was interesting. People have said and commented that it looks like I've lost weight during the sabbatical. I actually lost no weight. What I have done is I probably shed some fat and I built a lot of muscle. I've been really pumping it hard at the gym. And so the additional muscle and the loss of fat, I think, makes it a wash in my total weight. But I don't care about the weight anymore. To me, it's about, do I feel good mentally and physically, emotionally? Am I strong? So that's where I am at this point in my life. Bonnie says, thank you for helping me with my cholesterol stuff this morning. I love hearing your story. Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, I was happy to help you. Thank you. I feel stuck, says Beth. I feel like any effort to help others is mocked. I grew up with fear and doubt instilled. I can listen to my truth. It's still difficult to implement. You know, if people mock you for speaking truth, Beth, that's their problem, not yours. Why are you holding their issues in your heart? Let it go. You want me to sing on camera? You had me do the fasting drops directly on my tongue last year. You want me? I'm gonna sing again. If you don't watch it now, I'm gonna sing it. You know I'm gonna. Anita says, I think God sends us directions we need to go at certain times in our lives. The sabbatical was his intervention or intention for you to heal and now help others. That's how I feel anyway. Anita, I don't disagree with you. I do think all of this was for a purpose in mind. Miss Stacia says, I was sexually abused by my grandpa till I was 5. I think my inability to ask for and accept help is a direct result of it. So many parts of our personality now were shaped by how we were treated and this trauma that we've been talking about in our childhood. All of it. All of it. And it makes us who we are today. And we have to be okay with that. I'm okay that I have qualities about me that were directly made and created because I had my head smashed into walls, because my dad chose to emotionally berate me and make me feel like I was worth nothing. I have qualities about me today that are good because those things happened. And those good qualities have now made me successful. I don't think the success happens right away, though. Let me make this caveat with this statement of, did my childhood shape me into being successful? All throughout my late teens and into my 20s and into my early 30s, I did not feel successful. I felt like an utter and dismal failure. Why? Because I was still dealing with the after effects of the trauma. But once I came on the other side of the trauma, and I realized, okay, it happened, move on with your life, then is when I started being successful. Ironically, I didn't lose weight initially on the Atkins diet in 2004. I was 32 years old. That was 15 years after leaving the house and leaving my abuser. That's when I lost weight, because that was about the same time I had come to terms with what my dad had done to me and realized it happened and realized I needed to move on in my life. And it was at that point when I lost 180 pounds. And a few years later was when my brother Kevin died. And that's when the weight gain started happening again. Now, that was 12 years ago. But I think when you've had trauma in your body and then another traumatic event hits, it hits you harder than it hits people who've never experienced trauma before. If you're already a damaged vessel, why would you be any better off if another traumatic event hits? And let's face it, guys, everybody deals with trauma at some point in their life. If it wasn't in your childhood, it was during your adulthood. So many things can lead to trauma. And how your body reacts to that trauma is going to vary from person to person. There is no universalism about what happens when you're traumatized. Everybody handles it differently. But I was successful at losing weight once I came to terms with this. Then my brother died, and shortly thereafter was when my career took off. I started writing books, and I had huge commercial success with books in the years after that. But I never fully processed the death of my brother and the trauma that brought on. But I have now. My brother would be so proud of me today, because he went through crap in his life. He had not just my abusive father, but then later in his life, an abusive wife. And that's why he died at 41. So much trauma. Could never overcome it. Could never be successful. So my success today is Kevin's success too. Survive and thrive, says Elise. Yeah, I agree. All right, Beth, I was on the verge of crying there a second ago, and you want me to sing. What should I sing? My favorite song of singing to you. Let it go, let it go. Okay, that's it. You've opened my eyes to change, says Rosita. Well, thank you thank you for that. I am only trying to help people to realize that the pain of your past is not something you should still be wallowing in now. You have overcome. You're here today for a reason. Now go live that reason. Sharon says, my father did such a number on me, my sister, and my mom. We all have health issues now, some even similar to the trauma coming into play really makes sense now. It is amazing, this connection with the mental and emotional parts of our body and how it plays physiologically in our health. How many people dealing with obesity, and I'll even say, I would argue, and I would love to see a study if it's not been done, I would argue that someone who has been through intense, really intense childhood trauma, and people who become like extraordinarily morbidly obese, talking 400 plus pounds, 500 pounds, 600 pounds, all of those people have to have gone through something in their life that they're now covering up the pain with food. All of them. There's a popular show on TV, My 600 Pound Life. I would almost bet every single one of those people on that show had some kind of childhood trauma, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, or some trauma that happened to them that just shook them to the core. You don't get to weigh 600 pounds without some stuff happening. So there's an indelible connection, that's for sure. Angie says, still handling freakouts from being outside in the tornadoes last March. Still can't sleep, and I freak out during storms trying to deal. Yeah, traumatic events are no respecter of persons. Literally anybody could be exposed to this. Joyce says, I'm proud of you. This is a hard experience to talk about. You're going to help a lot of people. Thank you, Joyce. Keto Court, what time do you go live? I keep missing it. Well, you won't miss it. I've been sharing all over social media the times and the topics. So today, before I came on the air a couple of hours ago, I posted it everywhere on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere. So you know what time I'm talking. Today it was 11 a.m. It was 11 a.m. yesterday. I like this 11 a.m. time slot. If you guys like it, I'll keep trying to do this time slot. I also did a 6 p.m. one last night, but I started kind of getting sleepy, so I'm not sure if I'm doing 6 p.m. again. But I'm hoping to maybe set a time, and 11 a.m. seems to be a good happy medium for most people. So no set time, but I do announce it on my social media pages, so hopefully that helps you out. Brittany says, the medical trauma I faced recently brought up all of the childhood trauma. Yes. When you have new trauma hit, totally unrelated to your childhood trauma, it's going to bring up recollections of all that stuff. How could it not, Brittany? How can your brain assimilate okay, well, I had childhood trauma over here, and so now I had a medical trauma over here, and that's separate from this. No, trauma is trauma. It's all a part of the same process in your brain. So when you start going through stuff, and especially you, Brittany, those of you that don't know, realfood.reallife went through a pretty traumatic incident. She and I talked about it on my podcast that's coming up soon, Living La Vida Low Carb Show, where she was very scared, and she probably had a lot of her life flashing before her while she was in the hospital. Over 3 weeks she was in the hospital with complications from a surgery that she had. It was bad. And I'm sure all that stuff got conjured up, Brittany. And my brain linked being touched unwillingly as a child to being touched and in pain in hospital. I cannot imagine. New trauma brings up the old trauma. So yeah, that's true. Sharon says, we all have autoimmune issues and they largely affect me and always will. Talking about her family dealing with the oppressive dad. Yeah, for sure. Jay says, good to hear your voice again. Thank you, Jay. It's good to be back. I really have missed you guys and I'm happy to be back. So we have a little bit of time left. I'm going to come over to my Facebook page over here. Thank you guys for being here. There is a Facebook page there. For some reason, that one right there, I can't see any of your comments. I do go and watch those comments, by the way, after this is over. So if you're leaving a comment, just know I do see your comments, but I can't see it in real time. For some reason on my phone, there it's just a blank screen. I see there's people there. Like, I can see the people there, but I don't see any comments. All right, let's come over here, see if there's any comments we want to bring out here. Christy says, you are one or two people. You make what happened to you make you a better person, or you let it keep you down. Boy, that preaches. Sarah says, I went through abuse when I was young, which led to bad choices and alcohol at a young age. I just now am starting to heal over it, but it does leave some ugly scars. Those scars stick around a while, don't they? In the meantime, those scars can affect other people in your life. And I know there were many years there where I was trying to heal from my trauma, from my childhood. And I could not fully heal until I came to terms with it. Well, in the meantime, people in your life get hurt. And then you traumatize them. You see how this just pervades all across society? How it becomes this huge crisis. Think about all the crime. Think about all the hate speech online. Those are people dealing with some trauma. You want to see traumatized people? Go to Twitter. You're going to see all kind of funky monkey people saying the ugliest things about each other. It's trauma. It's stuff that's unresolved. Rita says maybe they don't know how to turn it around. Maybe no positive person was in their life to change. Well, I'm trying to be that positive person for people now, because I know there's a lot of people that have no support from family. They have no support from friends. They literally have nobody, and they're trying to work through this themselves. This is why seeking a professional mental health therapist can possibly help you. And if you don't work through this with someone like that, don't ever expect to heal on your own. Sarah says, I became stronger and better now that I've forgiven, and I realize he must have had a bad childhood. Also, the Lord gives me a forgiving heart. Understanding and having empathy and forgiveness for your perpetrators is so key. I can't tell you how many years I held a grudge against my dad for what he did to me. I hated his guts so bad. So bad. For the life of me, I always wondered, what did I do? Never once did I ask the question, why did he do that? Like, really dig deep into that question. And when you start digging deep into that question, the why that they did it to you, more times than not, you'll find that they had it done to them. And when you get that understanding and when that becomes crystal clear, everything comes into focus and it gives you a new perspective. So today, despite the fact that he banged my heads in the walls, punched me in my eye and gave me a black eye, told me to tell people at church I fell, emotionally berating me like nobody's business, touching me all over places he wasn't supposed to touch on my body. Today I have empathy for that man. today I realize that man was a broken man himself when he was my father. He's still my father. I'm not trying to say, he's no longer my father. You are not the father. No, he's still my father. But he was never a dad. And I needed a dad. But today, I understand. But I'm 48 years old. I would have loved to have known the context at 14. I would have loved to have gone to other family members at that age and said, Dad needs help. Let's take him to a psychiatrist. Let's take him somewhere where he can get the help he needs to deal with the trauma. Because his trauma then led to him traumatizing me, which then led to so many years of wasting my life. How many years are all of us wasting? All at the altar of trauma that was never dealt with. Trauma that's just left there to resolve on its own. How many people do you know dealt with traumatic events in their life, either in childhood or adulthood, where the trauma just disappeared on its own? And that's right, none of us know anybody that's ever had trauma just disappear. It doesn't. And if your brain works like mine does, you don't forget it. And you have this movie reel that keeps playing over and over and over. And that works on you. More comments on Facebook. Looks like I got them all. So thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. I'll push that back. Steph, you are opening up a can of worms. Just look at our politicians. Yes, I'm trying not to look at politicians right now. Speaking of the ugliness that is the online world, we're not going there. So I guess this Jimmy Rants is all about looking at the bright side of when you go through stuff in your life. If you've dealt with childhood trauma, if you've dealt with trauma of any kind, you're going to go one of two ways. You can be extraordinarily successful and do great things in your life and have a heart for people and have a heart for wanting to help other people that have gone through the circumstances that you have and not overcome them. Or you can fall by the wayside and wallow in your pity and think that your life was a total wreck and mess. And you, my friend, if you choose that path, will not live for very long. You will die long before you're supposed to. And that's one really great thing about what happened to me, was I refused to let this kill me too soon. And I've said this before, I think if I had not dealt with this at this moment in my life, that I would have followed in the footsteps of so many people in my family who've had heart attacks and have died. Within the next 10 years, I think I would have died had I not come to terms with this. And now homeboy wants to live to 100, so let's make it happen. They have to want help. I don't think a lot of them admit to it. That's the thing, Rita. When you don't realize you have a problem, when you don't realize those things of, quote, long ago are still impacting you to this day, then how do you change? How do you overcome? How do you adequately deal with it so that you can move on and be successful? I think it's impossible. I don't think it's possible for you to even go there until you come to terms with it and deal with it in the moment. Guys, I have so much more I want to say about this topic of childhood trauma. And I don't want this to be all childhood trauma all the time. I definitely wanted to put a lot of focus on it this week since I came back, but I feel like this is just so important. So definitely send me some feedback if you want more of this kind of thing. I will definitely keep it going. I can definitely wax eloquently about keto and fasting and cholesterol and all the things that I've talked about for umpteen years. But this is what's driving every creative thought, every creative juice in my body right now. I just feel like this is an underserved topic that not enough people are talking about. Joyce asks, are you in therapy? So thank you, Joyce. So yeah, when I came back on Sunday, I talked very openly about some of the things that I put in place before I left on sabbatical. And one of the things that I did was I hired a life coach who is a licensed mental health therapist. So she's been wonderful. That's helped me give perspective, especially when all the you-know-what hit the fan right after I left with this childhood trauma stuff coming and staring at me straight in the face. So yes, I am seeing her. When we first started talking, we were talking about every week. And then we backed it down to every 3 weeks now. So in fact, my next session with her is on Thursday. So I am still regularly talking to her. Incredible when you go with a licensed therapist who has understanding of the techniques and the information, and to help work through it. Life coaches are amazing for that, but don't just choose flippantly any life coach. Definitely go seek out ones that have some therapy background. But yes, I am getting help with this, so thank you for that. Sharon says, so if the abuser wasn't abused themselves and actually had a great family life growing up, how do you find a way to forgive or come up with a reason for why they did what they did to you? It's so hard. Thank you for that, Sharon. I find it highly unlikely that someone who abuses someone now possibly came from a good family. I can't wrap my head around that. I'm sure it could happen, but I think the greater possibility and probability is they had something happen in their life that triggered this traumatic response. Because I don't think you do that to any other human being, whether it's your biological family or anybody, without going through some stuff. I think about the people that, go into houses and kill, or go into churches and do mass shootings, or any of these like really horrific crimes that we hear about. I don't think someone gets to that point unless something broke inside of them mentally. And whether it was childhood trauma, whether it was the sudden death of someone that was really close to them, something happens that breaks people in the head. And when you break, you do things you would not otherwise have done. And so your question is kind of misleading for me, because I don't think, I don't think you could get there without having something have happened. But forgiveness is forgiveness, regardless of the reason why. We all want a reason why. We all want closure. And what I was talking about last night in my Jimmy Rants was, why do we have this secrecy, and why do we hide this, and why is there shame? The secrecy, the hiding, the shame doesn't allow for closure. How many people are living their lives and they're not getting that closure? You got to come to terms with that, whether you get the closure or not. Good for you. I hope you can share how she helps you, says Joyce. Yeah, Joyce, I'm working on getting my life coach to come on my podcast. And I'm going to be frank with her and just let her openly talk about some of the things she observed, helping me through this time. So yeah, stay tuned. She's very busy right now. I've invited her on, but she's got a lot of time crunch in her schedule. But when the time comes, I would love to have her come on, and I'll have her be very open and honest about where I was mentally before the sabbatical, and then after all this hit the fan. With the childhood trauma stuff, she was there all along the way. So she would have a very unique perspective to share exactly what you're talking about. Peter Levine's work is based on his interview on mass serial killers, says Steph. Yeah. You don't get to that point where you harm other human beings unless you're just not right in your head. So not surprised that this is something that has come up in research and people studying this. So. All right, guys, so I want to tell you, these Jimmy Rants have been going up on jimmyrants.com, so definitely go check out the past episodes. We're also putting them back on YouTube. Yes, they blocked me before I left on sabbatical, and then it came back right before I left on sabbatical to completely remove my account. But it's back now, so we're posting all the videos on there as well. I'm on Instagram Live here, Facebook Live there. Definitely trying to become regular with this content. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. And we're definitely going to be back with a whole lot more Jimmy Rants in the near future. So until next time, we'll see you then.